That night, the sky looked the same as always. Deep, untouched, breathing through millions of points of light. But at some moment, between one blink and the next, something changed. There was no warning, no noise, no movement, no announcement. The stars simply disappeared. The sky, once alive, became a black, smooth, textureless surface, as if it had been erased by a gigantic, indifferent hand. People went out into the streets, lifted their eyes, and waited for something to return. A spark, a comet, any glimmer that could indicate a temporary error. But the celestial dome remained empty, impenetrable, a void so absolute it seemed to absorb even the sounds of the city. In that moment, many felt that something deep had been broken. It wasn't just the disappearance of stars. It was the visceral feeling that the universe had pulled away, withdrawn, forgotten. The first hours were marked by an uncomfortable silence, as if everyone were waiting for someone to say it was a natural phenomenon, a temporary anomaly, a passing atmospheric trick. News began to appear, timid, empty, repetitive. No scientist had explanations. No telescope found a single source of light beyond the moon. Even the satellites recorded a horizon with no reference points. The silence turned into unease. Unease turned into denial. And denial slowly began to dissolve into fear. People were not prepared for a sky without stars, for a night that seemed to have neither origin nor destination. It was as if the universe was now closed off on the outside. And when the first scream was heard, not of pain, but of sheer inability to understand, panic found space to be born. As the hours passed, navigation systems began to fail in cascade. Ships lost their routes, planes had to land, positioning satellites showed inexplicable errors. There was no longer any celestial base to navigate by, no fixed point in the infinite to indicate direction. The artificial lights of the cities became fragile, small, almost laughable in the face of the void that ruled the sky. It was then that many realized they depended on the stars more than they had imagined. They weren't just cosmic ornaments, they were invisible compasses, silent pillars that sustained the rhythm of the world. Without them, something much deeper began to shift, even if it was not yet visible. The first night without stars brought with it a strange, suspended atmosphere, as if the world had stopped in the middle of a breath. But the real catastrophe began the next day. Without the thermal balance established by the stars and their influence on atmospheric layers, weather patterns began to fail. Winds appeared without origin. Storms dissipated for no reason. Previously stable regions entered frantic climate cycles. The planet seemed to be reacting, groping in the dark, trying to understand an absence that went far beyond the visual. And as the atmosphere became unstable, people began to understand that the world was not just without light, it was without direction. Governments collapsed informationally. Experts diverged in hypotheses and counter-hypotheses. Scientific, religious, and conspiratorial theories clashed and multiplied, each trying to fill the void left by the disappearance of the stars. Some people believed it was the natural end of the universe. Others believed something had covered the sky with some kind of cosmic membrane. Some argued that the stars were still there but had been turned off, a concept that, although absurd, no longer seemed so impossible. Fear now branched out. There was no single answer, and precisely because of that, all of them seemed possible. With the complete absence of natural light during the night, electrical systems began to overload. Entire cities tried to compensate for the void with lamps, billboards, illuminated towers, and improvised structures, but nothing was enough. The darkness consumed everything around it, devouring colors, shapes, and even the sense of depth.
It was a kind of darkness humanity had never faced, not the one that comes with sunset, but a primordial darkness, dense, almost physical, a presence, a boundary, something that seemed to stare back. Astronomers reported that beyond the stars, entire constellations had vanished from the records. Distant galaxies no longer emitted any signal. Telescopes pointed at infinity now reflected only solid black, as if space had been replaced by a uniform, opaque plane. The prevailing feeling was that the universe around us had been turned off, as if the cosmos had entered standby mode. And the question that arose in everyone's mind was as simple as it was terrifying. If there are no stars, what exists beyond the darkness? Entire regions lost control of their maritime and air routes. Trains came to a halt. Overland caravans became unfeasible. Without the reference of the stars, it was like trying to walk through an infinite maze. The oceans became particularly dangerous. Vessels wandered aimlessly, trapped in unknown currents. Nights ceased to be an interval and became a continuous, unpredictable scenario, where even the wind seemed to have lost its sense of where it should blow. It was a boundless expanse without direction, where humanity seemed increasingly small and disoriented. Weather phenomena intensified. Hurricanes formed in unlikely places. Heat waves arose in the middle of the night. Spontaneous frosts covered tropical regions. The patterns that once guided the planet's behavior had simply disappeared, as if the disappearance of the stars had broken some delicate mechanism that kept Earth in balance. Now everything felt improvised, chaotic, unscripted. The world was responding to an absence so absurd it bordered on the incomprehensible. Over time, humanity began to fear not only the darkness, but the sky itself. Looking up became uncomfortable, almost painful. That absolute emptiness, with no texture or depth, awakened an ancestral sense of helplessness. People began to avoid going out at night. Children cried when they looked up. Adults turned their faces away automatically, as if exposing themselves to the darkness might attract something from there. It was as if the sky were not just empty, but waiting. Research centers worked without rest. Telescopes, radio telescopes, probes, satellites, everything was repurposed to try to understand the absence of cosmic light. The conclusions were always the same and always insufficient. Nothing was there. Nothing emitted a signal. Nothing reflected. Nothing came back. The idea that the stars had been deliberately turned off, once seen as absurd, began to seem plausible. After all, nothing natural could simply switch off the universe with such precision. As despair advanced, theories about external agents began to emerge. Beings, entities, cosmic intelligences that might have unknown reasons for turning off the stars. Perhaps a form of isolation. Perhaps an experiment. Perhaps a warning. Although governments tried to control the spread of these ideas, the population embraced them quickly. It was easier to believe in an unknown entity than to accept that the universe had simply given up. Entire regions began to suffer blackouts. The global electrical infrastructure, pushed beyond its limits, began to fail. The darkness became even more absolute. People lit candles, flashlights, anything that could tear a bit of that blackness. But nothing seemed enough. Now, the world was heading toward a complete night, not just without stars, but without any light at all. And as the last cities began to flicker, a collective feeling took hold of the survivors. We were being prepared for something. Then, in the midst of the eternal void, an anomaly appeared. It wasn't a light. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a message. It was a pattern, a subtle ripple in the void itself, as if something were moving behind the darkness. Satellites picked up minimal changes, imperceptible to the human eye, but distinct enough to indicate intention. Someone, or something, was there, hidden behind the dark, watching, waiting for the world to adapt to the new eternal darkness. One question echoed across every frontier of civilization. Who turned off the stars, and why? Every theory seemed insufficient, every hypothesis too small. The world went on, staggering between fear and hope, trying to rebuild life in a silent universe. But for many, the feeling was clear. The disappearance of the stars was not the end. It was only the beginning of something greater, deeper, older than any form of life on Earth. Something that had taken the first step and was patiently waiting for the right moment to take the second.